Hello, welcome to the return of Sunday Politics East. The next few weeks will be extraordinary. With us this week, the Suffolk MP, Dr. Therese Coffey, who has just been promoted to Secretary of State, and the Norfolk County Councillor Steffan Aquarone, who will be fighting the seat of Mid-Norfolk for the Liberal Democrats at the next election. Of course, that election may be just a few weeks away. Also this week, we speak to the Lib Dem leader, Jo Swinson, about her hopes when a general election comes.
If you look at the election results in a place like Chelmsford, where we had stunning election results in May, I think that shows that people are coming to the Liberal Democrats and voting for us in much greater numbers.
And the businesses which believe they were forced out of this former office block thanks to the planning rules.
Permitted development, no, it shouldn't be permitted, it should be stopped. The government should scrap it straight away, because this is rubbish.
But let's start with Therese Coffey, the new Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But of course, you're also the local MP for Suffolk Coastal. Let's have a look at these scenes in your constituency yesterday. Hundreds of people in Thurberton Church as part of a weekend of campaigning about a plan to build a new nuclear power station at Sizewell. EDF, the company which runs Sizewell, says it will continue to be a good neighbour and is undertaking more consultation than is legally required. Sizewell is surrounded by wildlife sites like the Nature Reserve at Minsmere, where 1,000 demonstrators are expected today calling for environmental protection. Charlotte Rose is there. Charlotte.
Stuart, well, as you can see, it's a beautiful day today here at Minsmere on the Suffolk coast, and preparations are already underway for the event. As you say, over 1,000 people expected to attend to show their concern about EDF's plans for the new nuclear generator at Sizewell. 20,000 people have already taken part in that public consultation, but today they want to show the strength of feeling. Where I'm standing here on Winds Hill is, of course, home to the BBC's Springwatch programme, as well as being a haven for birds and other wildlife. Demonstrators say this area needs greater protection, and at 1 p.m. they're going to form a giant love heart with their own bodies to show just how much they care about this special place.
Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. Therese Coffey, it's difficult for you, isn't it? Because lots of people don't want it, and yet there are some people who say it's good for business, good for the country.
Well, in a survey I did a few years ago, no doubt, the majority of people in the constituency who responded wanted it because of that very reason. But I think it's important, and the jury's still out as far as the EDF being able to satisfy the environmental demands that actually this government has strengthened over the years in order to whether or not this project could be recommended to the Secretary of State for agreeing with. So there's still a long way to go, but I think it is fair to reflect that EDF have been very good neighbours of the area, have constantly tried to make sure the environment is enhanced. Oldhurst Farm is already underway in terms of mitigation, but there's still quite a long way before any decision will be made.
And Minsmere is very important to this region, to this country.
It is.
Across Europe.
It's one of the jewels in the crown, and I've recently been the Environment Minister, which I was for 3 years. I'm very conscious of the special environment that we have along the Suffolk coast. I should point out that the area became an AONB after nuclear power started there. So I've always been able to say, well, this was always going to be a nuclear cluster, but I'm concerned about in particular about some of the other energy projects, because I don't want this AONB, this special area, just to become an energy dump just because nuclear power is there already.
Let's move on to your job. Congratulations, first of all. Your shadow says that your first act should be to put a halt to universal credit, will you?
Well, actually, I went to Reading Job Centre on Thursday as my first visit, and I was so impressed by the work coaches there helping people into work. And in particular, the civil servants said this is the best thing they have ever done in order to fulfil one of the reasons why they want to help people, not just a tick box into any job. But the whole principle of universal credit is that you will be better off in work than if you don't work unless you cannot work. And the point is, it's not just the first job you have, but trying to help people up that career ladder. So actually, I think it's a very successful policy. There's no chance that we will be stopping universal credit. It is important that this continues, and I think it's a good thing that we have achieved. There's still a way to go for the migration from people on the existing legacy benefits, but that is something why we are taking our time to do that carefully.
So when you hear all of the hardships that we hear from various people about adopting universal credit, you will still go with what your people are saying at Reading Job Centre?
Well, I'm seeing the record number of people in employment. I'm seeing the fact that people are having more money as a result of universal credit.
Food banks. We've got food banks in schools.
I'm very conscious of food banks and the way it has increased. The very first food bank I actually helped with was in 2006, when the country was supposed to be at its most prosperous under the Labour government. And I think there will often be a place for people to try and help those, especially where the system hasn't worked. And I'm conscious of that too. Let's not pretend the government gets every single element right when they're rolling out some of these policies. So I'm confident about the success of universal credit, but that doesn't mean that we don't stop and help the vulnerable, and especially when things go wrong.
Can I just mention a couple of your voting records? Consistently voted for the bedroom tax, voted against raising benefits in line with inflation, voted against higher benefits for people with long-term illness or disability. Those things, if you're in charge of work and pensions, I might be quite concerned if I was on benefit.
Well, I'm not entirely sure where the source of that is. It might be theyworkforyou.com, which is not an independent website. But it's absolutely, I voted for the spare room subsidy without question, because the fact is that there are people in the private sector who don't have access to benefits, who want to be able to try and get larger homes as their families grow. So I have no hesitation about that. The benefit freeze was something that was brought in by the government. And again, this was in order to try and make sure that some of the benefits that we did have actually went to the most vulnerable. So some of our most disabled people are getting far more money than they did 10 years ago.
So you're saying those
in order to
people
help them
needn't be concerned?
But as has been highlighted, I think, by my predecessor, that policy about benefit freeze is under review as we go forward. And that's something in my only been there for a few days. So trying to get my head around various other bits of policy is something that we will be getting on with, especially under this new administration.
I'm coming to you in just a second, so don't worry. Just one word about the state of the Conservative Party, with people joining the Lib Dems and with people saying that they can't stay in the Conservative Party, people being pushed out of the Conservative Party.
Well, clearly I'm sad that people have decided that they want to go and be a member of another political party while they're in Parliament. The people who lost the parliamentary whip have not been forced out of the party itself. That was done, in my understanding, as an element of discipline to try and say this is what the Prime Minister wants to do. On that particular Act of Parliament that went through, it completely went against the Prime Minister's leadership one of the reasons why he'd been elected leader, and that was to make sure that every option for trying to leave the European Union was still on the table.
So you expect those people back in, do you, very quickly?
Well, I think it's a matter for the leader, for the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip to decide. I'm sure that there may well be a way back for some of those people, but that's got to be a two-way street.
You want Ken Clarke back, do you?
Well, if Ken Clarke were to come back and say he would consistently support the Prime Minister, I think there'd be no hesitation.
Stefan, bringing you in, the Lib Dems now would appear to be a kind of dumping ground for anybody from the Conservative Party or Labour Party that don't agree with their leader.
I've been a Lib Dem for my whole adult life, and I don't feel dumped or dumped on.
Yeah,
by
you've
the
got
people
ex-Tories,
across
you've
the
got
floor.
ex-Labour Party people coming in.
Interesting times, hey? And I'm sure they were all given a good grilling before they were allowed to cross the floor. I mean, it's made for good theatrics, hasn't it? I don't think people have tuned into the machinations of Parliament anything like as closely as they have in the past few weeks ever before. So, you know, we've provided some entertainment value, and many of those people have voting records that I don't agree with, but they're welcome in our party.
Okay. We'll move on because we're going to talk about your conference now. Let's hear more about the Liberal Democrats. And for them, things have been looking up in this region recently, so the mood at their party conference in Bournemouth should be pretty good. Andrew Sinclair is there.
Good morning from Bournemouth. The party president, Sal Brinton, told the Lib Dems last night, "We are not the defeated party of 5 years ago. We are now standing at a crossroads of infinite possibilities." A lot of the Lib Dems' recent success is down to its stance on Brexit, and they may go even further later this morning by deciding to back a revocation of Article 50. It's a very uncompromising stance on Brexit, but could it backfire? After almost 10 years in the wilderness, the Lib Dems are bouncing back. 106 new councillors across the East in this year's local elections, a record number of new seats in the European Parliament. Which means that the party's social gatherings are becoming much happier affairs. This is the Chelmsford branch out enjoying a pizza.
With Labour and Conservatives being in complete disarray and Lib Dems being very firm about what they want, I think people see that security, firmness, and that's right.
Staunch Labour and Conservative voters are switching, which is the first time that I've seen older people do that.
I rejoined the party in 2015 after the obviously catastrophic election result for the party because I was keen to help rebuild, and I think we need a strong Liberal voice in this country.
So you're 12. Why have you decided to join the party?
Because I believe in what they do, so climate change, they're very strong about that.
In fact, the look of the party is changing dramatically. Here in Chelmsford, 2/3 of Lib Dem councillors have joined within the last 4 years. The Liberal Democrats are feeling pretty positive as they prepare for the next election. They've got high hopes of taking the seat here, even though they came a very poor third last time round. But could the party's very clear anti-Brexit policy cause it problems in a largely Leave voting region like ours? Hello. That's the worry of the party's only MP in the East, Sir Norman Lamb, who had to fight so hard to hold on to his Leave voting North Norfolk seat at the last election. This week he joined a new group of MPs who want to work for a Brexit deal. He's long maintained that the Lib Dems need to accept the referendum result and move on.
I don't think there are enough people trying to find a way of bringing the country back together again. And unity for our country, I think, is more important than holding on to hard positions.
But his is a minority view. Most Lib Dems are very happy with the party's anti-Brexit position.
Well, it might put off some voters, but those that supported Remain can be reassured that there is a party that's going to stand up for their interests. And that's the problem with this government. This government has completely ignored the people who voted Remain in the referendum.
I'm not hopeful that we actually know what we're doing.
On a farm in Suffolk, Euro MP Barbara Gibson is learning about the possible impact of Brexit on agriculture. There is a worry among some members that the party's obsession with Brexit is clouding everything else that it stands for. Dr. Gibson is unapologetic.
What we've said is we need to get Brexit stopped so we can get back to the things that are important, like tackling climate change, like dealing with the inequalities in our communities.
Isn't there a danger for you that being just seen as the anti-Brexit party is putting off other people who might otherwise be supporting you?
I guess that's theoretically the danger. That's not what I'm encountering. So when we're out canvassing, I'm actually hearing more support for the Lib Dems.
And that's why the mood here in Bournemouth is very positive. This party knows that very soon it will be tested again at the polls, and it's confident that its message on Brexit will go down well with many voters. And the party had another boost last night with the news that the former Tory MP Sam Gyimah has joined them, and there are rumours of further defections later in the week. In fact, there was quite a bit of excitement yesterday afternoon when the Luton MP, Gavin Shuker, turned up at a Fringe event. He told them, "Don't worry, I'm not joining you, but I do hope you guys do well because of the state of politics at the moment." Well, let's talk a bit more about the Lib Dems and Brexit, because earlier this week I spoke to Jo Swinson and she made it very clear that the Lib Dems would keep opposing Brexit in whatever form.
Any Brexit deal is going to be bad for our country, bad for jobs, bad for the future of our environment, bad for our public services and our NHS. So whether it's a Conservative Brexit or a Labour Brexit, it's still going to be a bad Brexit, and that's why Liberal Democrats are campaigning to stop Brexit.
So what do you make then of one of your own MPs, Norman Lamb, sitting down with MPs from other parties this week and declaring that they want to work for some sort of deal?
Well, I understand Norman's position on this matter, and I disagree that that's the best way forward. But in a Liberal Party, we do have a range of individuals, and we manage to deal with views where we don't always see exactly eye to eye. Because I think in this polarised politics that we face right now, it is also important that we're able to respect one another's views and indeed to disagree well.
Our region is a Leave voting area, and Norman Lamb's view, and I think it's the view of a lot of members in our region, is that you've got to accept the referendum result because that's what most people voted for, and try and find some sort of deal.
Well, we were elected in a position of stopping Brexit, of making sure that we could do that through a people's vote, and that's what we still want to achieve in terms of putting any Brexit deal before the public for the final say.
But that stance plays well in Remain areas. But in a region like ours, in the seats which you are hoping to win in an election like North Norfolk, like Colchester, like Chelmsford, where most people voted to leave, that's going to do you damage, isn't it?
Well, we're setting out our position based on what we think is right. It's what we believe, and I think that's what's most important in politics, that you stand up for what you believe. But actually, if you look at the election results, in a place like Chelmsford, where we had stunning election results in May, I think that shows that people are coming to the Liberal Democrats and voting for us in much greater numbers. And obviously that includes many people who are Remain, but it's not exclusively people who are Remain, because people see in the Liberal Democrats a party that wants to get on with tackling the big challenges that we face, and that we're honest and straightforward about where we stand.
Jo Swinson, thank you very much.
Stefan Aquilone, you've got one MP in this region, Liberal Democrats, who doesn't agree with the party leader and is standing down. You're just as divided as Labour and the Conservatives.
Well, I was worried about you pitting me against the Secretary of State, but pitting me against my political mentor is even more difficult. I think Norman's views are his honest views. And at this point in time, I think so many people would rather politicians actually said what they thought. I don't agree with him, and my mind has changed. I've moved around. I've obviously voted and campaigned to Remain. A few months ago, I was starting to understand the arguments for trying to build a consensus for some sort of Norway deal. I'm afraid I'm now back to being absolutely dug in on stopping Brexit. And I totally agree with what Jo has just said about the need to disagree. I'd much rather we disagreed based on what we actually felt was right. And
so is he a lone voice in your party, do you think?
I don't agree with Andrew's point that most of the membership in the region agree with Norman's view on this. I think they understand it and they're very respectful of it. But I don't think
actually we took the interview to North Norfolk earlier this week and played it in his constituency. It was hard to find anybody who agreed with your leader.
Well, I think you may have taken it to one of the more Brexit-facing towns. We did a survey across different towns with the stickers on the different parts of the whiteboard saying what sort of deal you thought we should have, and there was huge diversity in different market towns across North Norfolk. I know that where I'm standing in Mid-Norfolk, the majority of people voted to leave even more extremely than in North Norfolk. What I'm dug in and committed to doing is having the conversation again. At some point, we have to restart the conversation.
Are you worried that actually what your view is undemocratic?
No, I'm not.
Well, it is, isn't it? You're ignoring a referendum result.
An advisory referendum, which was conducted for the wrong reasons by a man who's now £800,000 worth of book advance to the richer. Conducted.
Oh, that's got nothing to do with it. Come on, that has nothing to do with it. And
the referendum has got everything to do with what was happening in the Conservative Party at the time, and it's impossible to dispute
but his
that.
book deal has got nothing to do with it.
I just mentioned, I merely mentioned that he had a book deal and he was that much the richer.
Okay.
I'm not saying it was a result of it, although it seems like a low amount of money to be bought off for to have a referendum.
Okay. Let's bring Therese Coffey in, yeah.
Well, Stuart, I voted in campaign for Remain. We lost. And as a consequence, I really am concerned about Jo Swinson just saying she's going to revoke because she doesn't agree with the result of the British people. So this is about respecting democracy. One of the challenges is about...
It's democratic.
It is in no way democratic, having said that we would accept the results of the referendum and then actually Parliament legislating to accept the vote of the referendum and to trigger Article 50. Undoubtedly, there's been disagreement about how we leave the European Union, with a deal, with the implementation period, or as some people would say, a clean break, as it were, no deal. And that has led to the turmoil where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and you have turmoil in your party. I mean, Sandina has gone to the Liberal Democrats today.
And I'm convinced that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is still trying to get a deal. And the only thing that actually managed to get through Parliament in any meaningful way was actually Theresa May's deal, but without the backstop. And that is what the Prime Minister is trying to secure. So it's important that we respect the result. Otherwise, people, and I'm sure you're seeing this on other BBC programmes, saying, I voted in the referendum, they ignored me, so why will I ever vote again?
But I totally understand that, and I'm happy to say I don't respect the referendum result. It's hate the sin, not the sinner. I respect the people who voted to leave. Many of my good friends voted to leave. I cannot respect the result. This was a machination of the internal politics of the Tory party.
I don't understand the difference.
Well, I can dismiss.
Why can't
I can condemn somebody's actions.
It was a democratic
I
vote.
can condemn somebody's actions and not condemn them. I'm not interested in writing people off. I think people made the wrong choice. And if I didn't, why on earth would I be saying this? It's obviously not popular unless I actually believed it. I really believe we have to stay in. This is the only club in the world that we can be part of that stands for social justice. If we leave this club, we are in someone else's club, and that fundamental core of our values, of British values, is abandoned.
No, if we leave the EU, aren't we in our own club? With our own values?
With our massive empire and our ability to influence people around the world.
In this country.
Our values in this country are internationalist, they're democratic, they're open. That is the club that we naturally belong to.
Right.
Well, I can say that actually we're part of the Commonwealth Club, 53 nations regularly working together.
Built on empire.
Oh, go, Bob. Now to the wrangle over an office block in Colchester. We've told you before about the families living in converted offices. Well, this is the other side of the coin. The businesses, more than a dozen of them, who claim that they were forced out as part of a deal to convert the building into flats. Developers wanted to use controversial rules called permitted development, which bypass planning permissions. Here's Charlotte Rose.
Working from a shed in his garden. It's not what Steve Williams had planned for his business. Until a couple of years ago, he was running his engineering inspection firm from an industrial estate in Colchester. But he claims a developer with plans to turn the office block into flats forced him and others out. It's had a profound effect on his business.
Once you get established over certainly 15 years, it's not just your website, on certainly internet, which we use a lot. Our old telephone number stayed on that on different sites. There's links everywhere on the internet. So I found in certainly the last 2 years that customers were trying to get hold of us and still using the old telephone number.
He says he had to let go of 2 members of staff.
As a business owner and somebody who wants to start a business and create jobs for people, yeah, it's disheartening that we had to lay off people because of this move. We were very happy to stay at Dugard House and probably expand there.
Dugard House was home to around 40 small businesses. In 2017, it was sold by its long-standing landlord and then sold on again. The buyer wanted to build 95 flats here, some as small as 16 metres squared. Because of permitted development rules, the council had few options to stop it. But they managed to block it because of concerns over lack of parking and noise issues. That buyer was Caridon, which, as Look East reported earlier this year, used the same rules to turn this office block in Harlow into flats, described as a human warehouse. Those rules were introduced in 2013, meaning offices can now be turned into homes without planning permission. Caridon then sold it on for a profit to another company. That buyer was Highcrest Properties. It had plans for 35 flats, whose plans for fewer flats went through, but the building is now empty. The BBC's spoken to 13 of the businesses who were there, who said they didn't want to move.
Permitted development? Nah, it shouldn't be permitted. It should be stopped. The government should scrap it straight away, because this is rubbish. It's outrageous, it really is. We want people to have businesses, to start up, to make their way in the world. And they want to, because it adds to the area, it adds to the economy, it employs people, and it's what it's ideally suited for. But it's been taken away, just by permitted development.
In a statement, Caridon said, during the time of our ownership between exchange and subsequent sale, we had no authority or ability to force any business out of the property. Highcrest, the company which bought the property off Caridon and issued notices to quit, told us, the majority of tenants had planned to leave before or shortly after Highcrest acquired the building and left of their own volition. The local Chamber of Commerce says permitted development is putting extra demand on shrinking office space.
Very strong case for that. It's not just a question, these are abstract organisations, these are people's livelihoods. It's the livelihood of the people who own these businesses, it's the livelihood of the people they work for, and also it can impact on their customers as well. So yes, this sort of thing does need to be reviewed and, if necessary, the law changed.
But for Steve Williams and other firms previously based at Dugard House, any change in the law will be too little, too late.
Therese Coffey, we had the Labour councillor in there saying that this should be scrapped as an idea. And it should, shouldn't it?
The whole basis of planning law is that you can do something unless the government, through legislation, stops it. And one of the things that we've done is introduce local plans to stop sporadic things. Now, permitted development rights is, again, a long-standing principle. And I think this was done in 2013, recognising the challenges of trying to get more homes for people. And this was a way to allow, in effect, a change of planning class without it going to the local council.
So should it be scrapped?
Well, I think 5 or 6 years on, it probably is worthwhile to consider, has it had the intended outcome? I'm conscious of what's just been said there and also in Harlow. And I don't know if these are atypical.
Well,
some of the
Robert
issues.
Halfon, Conservative MP, says that actually what's happening is that councils in London social cleansing.
Well, I don't know the basis of what makes him say that, so I don't know that level of detail. And it won't be the first time that councils have placed people with housing needs where there simply aren't houses in their borough into other areas. But I think it probably will be worthwhile the government having a look at this to see are there unintended consequences.
Stefan Aquarone, should people be living in office blocks?
My biggest concern about this is just a lack of local accountability. I mean, yes, if it's right for the local area, no, if it's not. Yes, if it's humane, no, if it's not. It depends entirely on the circumstances. And to take away power from planning committees is just the erosion of democracy. We need the opposite of this. We need a new kind of politics that brings people back into the conversation, that re-establishes power at the level at which it affects people.
So perhaps we should build on greenbelt land, do you think, in order to find homes?
The same. We have a huge housing crisis in this country. I sympathise for the people who are in power trying to solve it. There's no easy solution, but the only solution is to work collaboratively with local people, not do things to them or for them. It has to be with people, and where they have local councils with planning departments who are designed to do that, it is outrageous that this sort of legislation runs roughshod over them.
Just answer that. Build on greenbelt, do you think?
It depends on the local situation, entirely.
So yes.
So yes, in some situations, no in others. We have a housing crisis. There are no easy answers. I'm sure you'd agree, Therese. There's no yes or no answer.
I mean,
to this sort of question.
Tories are pro-business, but there we are. We're getting businesses claiming, and it's their claim that they're being kicked out.
Well, with the what I'm hearing is that kind of small businesses offices, they're being displaced, and we saw that. I think it's a case of, as I say, I think it probably would be worthwhile having a look to see whether or not it really is. There isn't a shortage, in my experience, in my part of Suffolk, of where businesses can be based.
Both of you, thank you very much for being with us this week. That's all for this week. Amelia will be here next week with news from the Labour Party conference. We'll see what they can do about the splits in their party. But from all of us here, that's it. Goodbye.